Welcome to our fifth unit, The Triumph of Nationalism, and we're going to get started with a bit of an introduction. The Triumph of Nationalism is the title of our next, or the focus of our next unit here. It's a bit of a shorter unit again, as will be the sixth unit also. Now, this one talks a little bit about nationalism and basically gives some examples of the rise of nationalism and the impact of nationalism upon the world, leading up to the world that is set up to enter World War I. So we're kind of looking at concepts here that are foundational to History 20. And we're going to go through the intro here together and maybe discuss a few of these concepts and even challenge some of these concepts also. All right, so let's start. The 19th century, so the 1800s, was a century of isms, lots of ideologies. So nationalism, imperialism, which is actually the focus of our next unit, socialism, the rise of socialism, which we talked about, and communism, etc., which we talked about last unit, or mentioned, we didn't really dwell on it, but to name a few. The suffix ism means belief in. Nationalism is then the belief in nationhood. Sometimes the feeling of nationalism expresses itself in patriotism, pride in country, but not always. Patriotism could be pride in a country that isn't necessarily technically a nation. But patriotism gives you an idea of the similar sense. We're patriotic. We have undying allegiance to our country and our nation. Now, here are some of the things that comprise a nation. A nation is a group of people who share many things in common and therefore have a sense of unity as a nation. And here are some of those things that we can explore and see happening in the segment of history we're going to be looking at. You may have people who live close to one another, a geographical area. They speak the same language or have a similar language family that shows they are from a common ancestry, cultural, linguistically. They have the same government or similar way of governing one another or each other, or a same government in terms of one government overseeing that particular region. They have experienced the same history. So historically, you can go back, and it's well-founded enough that these people have a common history that makes them united. They worship similarly. They have the same belief system, okay? The same beliefs, the same faith, perhaps the same religion. They practice certain customs, so the same traditions, okay? The custom of this or that, okay? Might be an ethnic way of cooking or living or building or whatever. These customs that people have that makes them unique and united, okay? They celebrate the same holidays, so they have same traditions, the same major days that they recognize as a nation. They fight a common enemy or for a common cause. Another thing that can unite people is who their enemy is. So we are united because our enemy is over there, and we are united against those people. So then we have a nationness about us. It might be a cultural or historical enemy as well. And being dependent upon one another economically. So you thrive together as a community or a more broad community, economically benefiting one another, or benefiting your own nation with what you contribute to the globe economically. So these are some ideas that unite people and into what we could consider perhaps a nation. Now, all of these factors play a certain role in helping to create a nation. All right. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying country. I'm not saying political country. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying nation. Because I'm not saying you have a geographical border that's recognized. I'm not even saying you've got a national flag. Nation is very particular, and it doesn't necessarily follow that a nation means state, or that nation means country, or that nation means this geographical line on the planet. All right. A good example of that is we're going to be looking at perhaps First Nations. Okay. They're recognized as a nation. or French Canadians who want to be considered a nation within Canada. They have commonalities, a lot of these same things, yet they dwell outside of, or I guess inside, independent of controlling strictly politically something. All right. This is where it gets cloudy and complex, but I think the examples we look at give us good ideas of what nationalism looked like in the 1800s for certain key countries, which we'll get into. All right, citizens may not feel the sense of having many things in common with their fellow citizens. Such a place may be a country with one government, but not a nation. So if you have tons of different factions of people within a country, that might make that place a country, but not necessarily united to form a nation. And you could see the benefit in a country trying to inspire nationalism for national unity as an important factor in keeping that country together. Because if you're not united, then you have a tendency to move to division, to further division, all right? Which is something we will look at as well. So nationality is a label for people who feel part of a group with many things in common, such as language, customs, religion, etc. Everything we saw up there. You might say, that's my nationality. All right. Even us, even me, I might say my nationality is German. My ethnicity is German. And we kind of use it that way, perhaps. But I could also say my nationality is Canadian, because at this point, you could argue that Canadian identity has enough of these to say that Canadian nationality actually exists. Now, let's go look at these. So there's some good examples here, maybe some poorer ones, but Italian. All right. I'm actually wearing my Italian shirt today. My Italian shirt. So Italian, that's a nation. It goes very far back in terms of historical nationness. In terms of it being a united country, not the same, but in terms of being a nation or a people, okay, with a common identity, perhaps you could go quite far back. Okay, Chinese, sure. That's in my handout, by the way. I'm not like throwing China in here because of current events and the coronavirus originating from China. But it's interesting connection. And Canadian, they're all nationalities. Italy, People's Republic of China, and Canada are nations. So they're also geographical, political countries and states, but they are nations too. But take a look at this. Someone from Chinese descent living in Canada may or may not feel that his or her nationality is Canadian. Perhaps he or she feels displaced, misses familiar food, yearns to speak a familiar language with friends or neighbors, or perhaps he or she was born in Canada, is totally comfortable with the Canadian way of life, and knows more Canadian than Chinese history. Nationalisms could be a feeling created by experience, especially in our modern context where immigration is so involved in human migration throughout the world right now, is that you don't really have a country that is one unanimous cultural background. Because of immigration, you've got the influx of all sorts of different countries into Canada or other countries, which is what we term multicultural. That throws a bit of a wrench in the concept of nationalities and nationalism, because at this point in history, in the 1800s, immigration was very low, except to countries like in North and South America who were taking in immigrants, vast numbers of immigrants. But in any case, for most countries, immigration was low, and you had kind of one set of national culture within your country. Not so much today because of immigration. Okay. Modern nationalism, or the nationalism of the 1800s into the early 1900s, was born during the French Revolution. It spread throughout Europe during the 19th and 20th centuries. A desire grew among people of similar nationalities to group together in nations and express their feelings of loyalty to their nation. Eventually, it was nationalism that upset the balance of power created by the settlement at the Congress of Vienna to be discussed this unit. And nationalism also contributed to the coming of World War I to be discussed in grade 11 next year for you guys. Okay. And we have discussed nationalism already as a factor that propelled the French Revolution a couple units ago forward, as well as a factor which led to the leading destruction and eventual downfall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Nationalism being that force. So really what we're looking for in this unit is to show nationalism as a force so we can analyze it historically. And I think there are some interesting things to think about when we look at nationalism today. Okay, patriotism and nationalism today, especially when we look at the era of Donald Trump and the era of United States supremacy under his presidential power, and the emphasis and focus of being America first. That is a concept of nationalism, a growing sentiment in people, which you could say is virtuous. We should be patriotic to our country and look out for our country's good. But if every country looked out for its good and didn't care for one another, then suddenly you have room for conflicts to arise as well. So there is a sensitive balance here. Nationalism can bring some great things, some great unity, but can also bring some great division and great conflict on a broader global scale. This is why we study history, guys, so we can understand the power of a mentality, the power of an ideology that brews within the world and has cause and effect that we can only predict and imagine. But history can help us understand what actually happens when a culture or when a world is faced with growing nationalism, as we can see, only ends up with the worst war of that the world had ever seen up to that point, World War I. Now, nationalism is still on the rise to today in kind of a renewed way. I think after World War I and II, you tend to see a globalization effort of unity of nations and not emphasizing greatness of any one nation over another. But I think it's very interesting because today you sort of see this fear of nations such as China, which are clearly looking out for their own good, and taking advantage of the world because they can and they're powerful and whatever. And same thing with the United States being a global force that is looking out for its own good, and Canada being very reluctant to show national priority for nationalism because of our multiculturalism. Okay, we have so many citizens in our country who have ethnic background from every country in the world that we wouldn't want to say Canada is more superior than any other country, or that we should be more loyal or virtuous or patriotic to our country than any other country in the world. So you have this concept of globalism today, which is kind of being reverted back to this idea of nationalism. I mean, even in the coronavirus, every country is like out for itself. Okay, America, a great example again. They're going to be like shutting down exports of medical goods, even to Canada. Okay, shut the borders to masks and whatever. Okay, they're going to be creating their own ventilators or whatever, but they're not going to export those. Okay, they're looking out for their own good. Nationalism is something that kind of does that, and now you create sort of enemies with the rest of the world. Or this idea of China being the only supplier of medical equipment, and the world being under a complete shortage of that creates this sentiment of, wow, we should take care of ourselves, right? And we should bring economy and economic production and manufacture to our own country. I'm getting way off here, ranting about current context in the face of this topic of nationalism, but I hope you're getting to look at some insight and can observe those similar things once we look at the examples in this unit. Don't pay too much heed to this page here. We will go through it in our first couple slides of the chapter or of the unit. So we will come back. You can look it over. You can try to do it, but we're going to review it together in the next post. All right. I will talk to you later. Welcome to the unit on the triumph of nationalism.